get misgivings living in a haunted house. They're scratching at the door, feel a heartbeat through the floor. It's a ghostly rhythm living in a haunted house. The plates and silverware go flying through the air. Feel a hand around your neck and you become a nervous wreck. You jump into your bed, pull the covers over your head. You think it's just a dream until you hear somebody scream. Your heart jumps up into your throat, you're paralyzed with fear. Then you hear a demon voice say, "Get out of here!" You start to run, but there is nowhere left for you to hide. You realize you're standing in the spot where someone died. You're terrified by the sound of something strange, the rattle of bones and chains, and you get misgivings living in a haunted house. They're scratching at the door, hear the heartbeat through the floor. Yeah, the ghost got rhythm living in a haunted house. Every ghost goes. That sounds so good, it's scary. Suddenly, the phone rings. Hello, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. Hello? Hello? Who is this? Oh my God! The line's been cut! The phone! It's dead! That sound is something strange. The rattle of bones and chains, and you get misgivings living in a haunted house. It's scratching at the door, feel a heartbeat through the floor, and you're just not wanting. It's a haunted house. Know what I'm saying? Yeah, boy, this house is bugging. Okay. Hey, can you guys keep it down, please? I'm trying to get some sleep here. Ew! Okay, who slimed my pillow? Yuck! And whoever wrote, "You're dead" in blood on the bathroom mirror, I want it cleaned up before I get up in the morning. Hey, let's not get fresh here, okay? Oh, hey, come on, stop! Oh, a tickle! No, stop! Stop it!
All right, hello everybody. Let's see. We currently have about 3 or 5 viewers in the chat. What is the chat saying? Boomsick Bro says, "You've got my attention." Well, I'm glad to have you here. And Melanie Song, I hope I'm saying that right, says, "I have joined. Please leave my bucket alone." Yeah, I might have hopped in a certain Discord server and threatened to possibly defecate in people's trick-or-treat buckets if they didn't show up. But yeah, I think we've waited long enough, so I'm gonna mute my mic really quick, and then I'm gonna start the countdown, and we'll do this shit. Okay, and we are live. Hang on, let me turn the music down just slightly so it's not super loud. All right, Mimi, if you're listening at all, go ahead and unmute yourself. Oh, sorry, I just realized you couldn't hear me in the Discord call. Mimi, if you're there, go ahead and unmute. We're live.
Hi, Hi everybody. Hello. Hi.
Oh wow, and just like that the audio starts peaking. no,
Oh, sorry.
no, you're fine. Happy to have you here, Mimi, and you certainly got dressed up for tonight. Mind explaining the little outfit you have on tonight?
Yes. I decided since this is a Halloween horror movie discussion video, I decided to dress my avatar in an outfit based on the character Elaine Parks, played by Samantha Robinson in Anna Biller's The Love Witch 2016. And the reason why I decided to dress as the Love Witch is because tonight I am talking about a lot of movies which I love. You get it?
Nah, I get it. I see what you did there.
And The Love Witch, by the way, The Love Witch is not one of the movies I'm talking about tonight.
No, unfortunately, but it's definitely worth a watch. At least I think so. But yeah, as Mimi alluded to, tonight we're going to be talking about sure, horror movies, but more importantly, movies that get us in the Halloween spirit. So, Mimi, when you think of a movie that best describes Halloween, like what would you say like are the qualifiers for a good Halloween movie?
Well, it's got to be a movie that's like, it doesn't even necessarily have to be horror. It just has to have like horror theming. It has to, but it has to be fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it can't be like a depressing horror movie. It has to be kind of a fun one.
Yeah, so nothing like Martyrs or anything like that.
Yeah, we're not. Yeah, nothing like that. Well, I mean, there is one kind of extreme horror movie I put on my list, but it's one that I feel matches the holiday well because the second qualifier is that it's got to be a movie that's kind of got Halloween atmosphere. That has a lot of the visuals you associate with the holiday that kind of makes you feel like Halloween when you're watching it. And I did pick one movie that's kind of brutal for this list, but it has that quality to it.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree with your criteria. I would say for me, like, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be horror, but definitely the kind of movie that like gets you in sort of that sort of spooky mood where it can be scary, but at the end of the day, it should also be kind of fun. Like the sort of movie that, you know, if you're a little kid, it might creep you out, but as you get older, you can look back on it and go, oh, that's actually kind of a fun movie. I dig it. Oh, and by the way, Coma Lies 225 in the chat says The Love Witch is one of my favorites, so you've got a fan there.
Awesome.
All right, so I guess I'll kick this off. And if any of these picks seem familiar to people in the audience, that's because I lifted these wholly from a list that I made years ago. Of the what I consider to be the 10 best horror films to watch on Halloween, which I also made a video on that if you ever want to check it out. So the first movie I have is this is kind of an obvious pick, but let me see. Halloween 3: Season of the Witch, which I think is probably the best like Halloween movie in the sense that like it's the best of the series that actually is about Halloween. It's the only one that doesn't have Michael Myers. Instead, it's about a mask making company that's making these Halloween masks, and they have this whole scheme where they're using a piece of Stonehenge and 1982 technology to transmit a message to children that will make their heads melt and, you know, like snakes and bugs and whatnot pour out. And it's up to an alcoholic doctor and a young girl to solve the mystery. Halloween 3 gets a lot of flack, mostly because it doesn't have Michael Myers in it, but I think Halloween 3 is an underrated gem. Mimi, have you ever seen Halloween 3?
Yes, I have seen it. And what I'll say about this movie is that every other film in the Halloween series, they're all called Halloween, right? But a lot of them could be set on any day, really, and it wouldn't change the story that much. It would just have to, you know, like even the first one, I mean, it doesn't have to be set on Halloween. It could just be set on some other night where somebody needs a babysitter, you know.
Yeah.
But and you would have to change a few little things, but in Halloween 3 the plot really hinges on it being Halloween more than any of the others do.
Yeah. Well, the thing about the original Halloween is the original title for the movie was actually going to be The Babysitter Murders, but I believe it was producer Erwin Yablans who came up with the idea of calling it Halloween and having it take place in Halloween, which does make sense because it is the it is like the most horror centric holiday, and Halloween is a better.
I think it's because they wanted another thing like Black Christmas, wasn't it? Or am I mistaken?
No, because I think I remember seeing a Q&A with Bob Clark, the director of Black Christmas, who also did A Christmas Story, where he talked about how he was working with John Carpenter on a movie that never got made, and Carpenter was like, hey, I really like Black Christmas, but is there ever going to be a sequel? And Clark was like, no. And Carpenter's like, well, if there was a sequel, what would it be about? And he basically said that it would be like the next year, and the killer from the first movie is still in the sorority house and stalking a new group of girls, but it's on Halloween. Though Clark has said that he doesn't feel that Carpenter ripped him off, but more so might have like been inspired by the idea to make what became Halloween. So it might have taken they might have taken a little bit from Black Christmas, but it could also just be a huge coincidence.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, Halloween's the one that got like a massive franchise, whereas Black Christmas never got a single sequel. It just got a remake and a movie with the same name that's not really a remake because of how different it is.
Yeah. But well, the thing that really bemoans me the most about Halloween 3 is that it was an attempt to do something completely different, because after 2, they basically wanted to end Michael Myers, and with 3, they wanted to create a new series of where it was like an anthology where each movie was a different story, but they all centered around Halloween. And I am really sad that never happened, because I think that has a lot of potential to create some really interesting stories, and probably would have been better than some of the sequels we got. Like, we would have been spared Busta Rhymes kicking Michael Myers' ass and saying stuff like, trick or treat, motherfucker.
I will say this too. Halloween 3 actually, in a weird way, it reminds me more of like the Phantasm movies than it does any of the other Halloween films, because it's the same kind of thing where it's like occultism with a sort of 80s sci-fi skin to it.
No, I can
and
see that.
You've got the sort of dignified bad guy in a suit who's, I don't know, it's just, it kind of reminds me of those to an extent. And it's and also I another thing I will say about the movie, when I first saw it, I was a little confused by the entire premise, because there was a part of me that kept wondering, why is this evil businessman, why does he want to kill all these children on Halloween? What does he gain from this? And he sort of implies, he gives a speech where he kind of implies that he's trying to bring back the brutality of the festival of Samhain, from hundreds of years ago. But the thing is, I feel like this movie needs kind of like a QAnon core remake for the modern era, where they explain that he wants to kill these kids to harvest their adrenochrome, because I feel like that would make more sense. And it would really capture the spirit of the time.
Yeah, I don't know if I wholly agree with that. I think the movie, the explanation as is, works just fine. That, he's just sadistic and he wants to, bring back Halloween's more sacrificial roots. And actually, that scene where he explains like the meaning of Halloween is like probably my favorite scene of the whole movie, just mostly for Dan O'Hurley's performance. And like, the way he delivers it is so sinister and creepy, and it's like you just can't take your eyes off him because of how like,
yeah, it's great. I mean, he brings sort of a similar quality that like Christopher Lee as Dracula or any other villain he plays does.
Yeah, he's like, the Festival of Samhain, the last great one, took place 3,000 years ago when the hills ran red with the blood of animals and children.
The reason I made that joke about the adrenochrome, though, is because this is very much like a conspiracy theorist movie in my eyes. Like, it's like the plot is essentially like a deranged conspiracy theory that just happens to be true in the context of the universe, you know, like some evil corporation stealing Stonehenge so they could sacrifice thousands of children, and you know they have android servants who try to cover up what they do and things like that.
Yeah,
but that's what makes it entertaining. That's the entertaining part of it to me, is the fact that it's a story that sounds like that.
Yeah,
on paper.
No, I can see that. But no, yeah, like I said, I think Halloween 3 deserves more love than it gets and is super underrated. And I like I said before, I think it's probably the best like Halloween movie out of the series, simply because like it, you know, functions more as a movie about Halloween than any of the other movies do. But that's just my thoughts. So I guess moving on, Mimi, what movie did you want to talk about first?
I think the first movie I'll talk about, just because it's fresh on my mind, because I did a watch party of it on Discord a couple nights ago, is Murder Party from 2007, directed by Jeremy Saulnier, who now some people may know Jeremy from the fact that he's gone on to direct more serious like acclaimed thrillers after this, like with a little better production value, like he did Green Room, he did Blue Ruin.
Oh, okay.
But this was I believe his first movie. It was made on a pretty low budget of, or I want to say around 200K.
Mm-hmm.
And it has sort of a gritty, low budget imperfect kind of aesthetic to it, you know, that you know, it was made in the 2000s, but it has a visual look, you know, especially during the nighttime scenes that feels kind of like a low budget movie you'd see in the late 70s or 80s, you know, the slashers of that era, where you have these just really heavy black shadows and sort of blue highlights at night.
Sure. So sorry.
No, go ahead.
No,
What's your question?
I was just gonna ask. Can you give us like a basic obviously not a full synopsis, but just a general idea of what exactly is Murder Party about?
Well, it's a movie about a guy on Halloween who finds an invitation to something called a murder party. He doesn't know what it is, and he just goes to the address on the invitation and basically ends up being tied up by a bunch of pretentious art students who want to make a snuff film with him.
Interesting.
It's kind of a satire. It's, to an extent, it's a satire of the art world, or like anyone who went to art college. I feel like I was showing this to Goodley, and he said he knew people like all these characters just without the murderous part. Because, and this movie, it has kind of a Halloween atmosphere, at least in the beginning. It also really captures this thing where it kind of starts before sundown, where it's just sort of gray outside, because a lot of people do start trick-or-treating before it's dark out. And you just got all these, you know, you've got this, but it does get darker as it goes on, and he goes to this warehouse where these people capture him. And the movie, I mean, it can be a little slow, but it's got a lot of funny dialogue, funny moments, you know, these characters who do feel very observational in a way. The guy who's in charge of this group of students, he's promising them a lot of grant money if they create this murderous art, and he's played by an actor who looks and kind of sounds like Will Ferrell, but isn't him.
Interesting.
He's just got a very similar face.
I gotcha.
I mean, it's fun. I mean, the main character, what's funny is the supposed main character actually doesn't have that many lines in the movie, because he spends a lot of it tied to a chair and gagged.
Yeah.
Most of the dialogue goes to everybody else, but it's pretty entertaining, and I think it's a unique idea, and it's more humorous than, like I said, than Jeremy Saulnier's later movies. It has it kind of has his stamp as a director still, but it's more of like a half comedy, whereas a lot of his later movies would lean harder into the thriller. Like if he made this movie, I don't know, a decade later, it might just be more of a straightforward thriller with this premise. I'm not sure.
I gotcha. I was checking the chat, and Goodley is bringing some things up. He said, "Murder Party is if like Tarantino directed Art School Confidential," which is an interesting take. And then he also says, "The werewolf guy is like three of my roommates all smushed together. The fact that they're all double the age they're supposed to be makes it even funnier."
Yeah, that's a funny aspect. There's a guy who, it does have some, kind of old school, like 80s B movie gore toward the end. Like there's a guy who wears a werewolf mask and he ends up lighting himself on fire when he's drunk by accident, and his face becomes sort of grotesque and like merged with parts of the mask.
Nice.
And there is this element of, it's a movie about these killers who they're totally incompetent, but the guy they've captured isn't super competent either. So that's where a lot of the comedy derives from.
I gotcha. Well, when you said earlier that it was made by the same guy who made Green Room, that definitely caught my interest because I loved Green Room. I thought it was an amazing movie. So I definitely should give this one a watch. It's just one of those movies that like I had heard about, but I just never got around to seeing. And hearing you kind of endorse it makes me all the more curious to check it out.
Yeah, you should check it out. I think if you like Green, it's not as like acclaimed, but I think if you like Green Room, you'll probably like it also. I mean, that is a more polished, like modern looking film, obviously, than this, but this Murder Party has its own kind of charm to it by how sort of imperfect and crummy it looks a lot of the time.
Sure. And I also do find it kind of interesting to see like where certain filmmakers got their start, just because I think it's interesting to kind of go back and see their sort of I guess grassroots beginnings, and then see like maybe what any sort of like little details that would carry over into their later movies. I just think it's kind of interesting to see how they got their start and then see where they went from there.
Yeah, it can be, but I would say this is, I believe, for a first movie, made on a low budget. Like I said, it's impressive enough for what it is.
Sure. So
like some directors have less impressive first movies.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. So I guess moving on, my next pick for a good Halloween horror movie would be Creepshow, which for the uninitiated is an anthology film directed by George Romero, written by Stephen King, who is the farmer here featured in the still on the screen. But it's essentially 5 stories, each of them not really connect with one another, except that they're all horror, obviously, and they take after the old EC horror comics like Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror. I love Creepshow. It's probably my favorite Romero movie that's not a zombie movie. I think it's one of those anthologies also where like all the segments work. Like there are some I like better than others. Like I think the second segment with Stephen King as a dopey farmer, and the third segment with Leslie Nielsen as like a crazed vengeful guy who's going after his wife and her lover, and the segment with Hal Holbrook where he's fantasizing about killing his wife. Those are probably my favorite segments, but all 5 of them I think are really strong.
Yeah, I like Creepshow a lot. But I would point out, I'm gonna point out an actually here. This movie does have zombies in it. Multiple segments have zombies. So
yeah. Well,
it's at least like 2/5 a zombie movie.
Yeah, but well, you know what I mean. Like it's not a movie that's focused solely on the zombies. It like zombies are in it, but they're not the main driving force. Like it's not the same as like Dawn of the Dead or Day of the Dead. It's different from those.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is. I mean, it doesn't follow the zombie apocalypse formula for sure, or zombie contagion formula, even in the segments that do have zombies. But but yeah, I think Creepshow is really entertaining. It's a very it's kind of a stylish movie, or at least like by 80s horror movie standards, it was pretty stylish. It had a lot of these comic book flourishes, some of which feel kind of primitive today in a world where we have like much fancier effects to make a movie look like a comic. But I find the style to be full of. I find it really charming. And you can tell when Rob Zombie did his Monsters movie recently, he was he almost like took the Creepshow style and pushed it to the point where it became kind of obnoxious. But there were moments where you could tell he was really, that was that was what he was studying.
Yeah, I'll have to take your word for it. I haven't seen the Rob Zombie Monsters movie. I've just heard it's not very good. But
well, it does the same thing where like they blast neon on somebody and an abstract background appears behind them to convey like intense emotion in a few places.
Yeah. I'm checking the chat right now. Squabbly says, film stream, time to learn about movies I have no interest in for 2 hours. That's what's up. Well, I mean, even if you're not interested in them, I'm glad that you're at least interested in hearing us talk about them. So that's something, I guess. But I was going to ask Mimi, what's your favorite segment from Creepshow?
Well, no, that's hard. I want to say I like the crate segment, and I like the one with Leslie Nielsen in it. I like those two a lot.
Mm-hmm. I actually really love those two are great, but I also love The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill, just because it's funny to see Stephen King, this acclaimed and highly regarded horror writer playing a really dopey farmer that is like a combination of like Jerry Lewis and Jim Carrey.
Yeah, I like that one too. I like seeing, well, like you said, I mean, this was before Jim Carrey was famous, but he was it's Stephen King playing a Jerry Lewis type, and that's very, I mean, that's very entertaining in its own right. I'm not even sure if I can call his performance good, but it's entertaining.
Yeah, meteor shit.
Yeah.
Oh, Jordy, you lunkhead.
Yeah, it's... I mean, that one's good too. That's the thing. It's kind of hard for me to decide what the best one is, because it's a pretty solid anthology where I don't feel I don't feel the segments overshadow each other too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say the only segment in the movie that like isn't bad but is just hard for me to watch is the fifth segment. If you know, you know. But
now I will ask, did you ever see either of the two sequels to Creepshow?
I have not. I've heard Creepshow 2 like isn't as good as the first one. But some of the segments are okay. I've heard the Raft segment, I think is what it's called. That one's pretty good.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is Creepshow 2 has only 3 segments, and one of them, which is the Raft, very much does overshadow the other two in terms of quality, like, in contrast to the first one, where they're all pretty good.
Yeah, and...
But I will say, you watch Creepshow 2, and all the style from the first movie is gone in that film.
Yeah.
It does, except for they add these animated wraparound segments, which is kind of a neat idea to get kind of a style in there that's different from what the first movie did, where you have these animated segments where it's this kid buying these comics and the creep talking to you, but which is I like as an idea in theory, but the animation has a very CDI Zelda-esque quality to it.
I gotcha.
Just with a somewhat better production value, but it has that kind of just awkwardness to it. But yeah, it's nobody likes Creepshow 3, but I like Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, which a lot of people view as the unofficial Creepshow 3.
Yeah, I know Romero and Tom Savini have said that Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, is like the real Creepshow 3, which I haven't seen that one, but I've seen clips of it, and it looks really good. And I haven't seen the quote-unquote real Creepshow 3, but I've seen videos on it, and... yeah, it looks...
I haven't watched that one for a reason. It kind of looks unwatchable just from the snippets I've seen of it.
It does. And let's see, the Schmetal Schmenis, I hope I'm saying that right. He says, did you ever watch Trick or Treat? Not the 2008 movie, the 80s Trick or Treat. And as a matter of fact, I have. I watched it at a local...
I have not.
I watched it at a local showing the other night. It's a pretty fun movie. basically about this heavy metal fan who's obsessed with this rock star named Sammy Kerr, who was killed in like a motel fire. But he's given this record that's supposedly like the last recording Sammy Kerr ever made. But when he plays it backwards, it's got like a hidden message to it, and he becomes like obsessed with it and is like carrying out Sammy's wishes like after his death. It's actually really cool. And it's got some fun little cameos from Gene Simmons and Ozzy Osbourne, who plays like an evangelical reverend who's talking about the evils of rock and roll, which is pretty funny.
Yeah, it was that kind of ironic casting, like the whole Meatloaf playing Jack Black's dad who hates his music thing in the Tenacious D movie.
Yeah. Oh, and the Schmeddle Schmenis also mentioned, can't forget that Six soundtrack by the band Fastway. Yeah, the soundtrack is also really good. Although, what's funny is, I can't remember who it was specifically, but there was a member from Fastway who went on to do quote-unquote better things, and he actually was, like, I guess, embarrassed by his work, so much so that that's the reason why it's the movie's like not been available on like digital media for so long, is because he tried to like bury it, which I think is just really petty. It's like, okay, maybe you're not super proud of the work you did early on, but like that shouldn't like prevent people from being able to watch the movie. Like, just, I don't know, just kind of get over yourself, honestly. So Mimi, what's the next movie you wanted to talk about?
Let's see. The next movie I want to talk about, let's see. I guess I want to talk about a film that kind of went a little under the radar recently, and that is Cobweb from 2023.
Okay, let me pull that up really quick. Oh, I think I might have. No, wait, that's Murder Party. There we go, Cobweb. Yeah, I don't think I'd actually heard of this movie before. What exactly is Cobweb?
Well, this movie, it didn't get well, I will point out, this movie did not get the best reception, and it did not make much money because it released around the same time as Barbenheimer. But it is a Halloween movie. It takes place on Halloween. It gets you into the Halloween mood, I feel. And it's basically, the way I would describe this movie too is that you have to go into it with the understanding that it's kind of a movie that operates on fairy tale logic, but I don't mean like Disney. I mean like old fashioned like scary fairy tales, you know.
I gotcha.
Where it's like this boy starts hearing this voice from inside the walls of his own house, like the voice of this girl talking to him, who claims to be his sister, and claims that his parents locked her away in the walls.
Okay.
And his parents are, they are kind of creepy and strange. And his dad is played by Anthony Starr of The Boys fame, Homelander. Who really sells the idea of his dad being creepy.
Yeah.
And basically this kid, he starts asking his parents questions about, and those are some of the, that's kind of the basic setup. I mean, the movie does have more twists as it goes on, and I will say one kind of issue with it is that some of the twists toward the end were very obvious and they were very telegraphed, I feel, but it's still worth watching it. One more weakness this movie has, I'll point out, is that it's an R-rated movie for no good reason. It is essentially a PG-13 movie with a couple gore shots thrown in toward the very end that weren't really worth it. Like, I think it might have done at least a little better if it weren't rated R.
I gotcha.
Because it is kind of but it is kind of, told from a kid's perspective, and I really like horror that's from kind of a kid's perspective, where everything in the movie has this kind of slightly heightened reality to it because of that. Like, you'll see a shot where he's like walking down the stairs and you'll see his parents, like giant blown up shadows on the wall and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's a little stylized, but not too much. And there's this great scene where where his parents, I'll say there's this very particularly creepy scene where his parents decide to punish him for kind of saying the wrong things, and the place they take him to is very scary. I'll just say that much, but I won't give much else away about it. Just say it did, like I said, it didn't get the best reception, but I kind of like it, and I think it's a good movie to watch for the holiday because it's set on it.
Okay, I'll definitely give it a watch. I did actually check out the trailer for it ahead of this stream, and it definitely looks pretty interesting. And yeah, the screenshot that I used with the shadows, it kind of reminds me a little bit of like that famous shot from Nosferatu where Count Orlok is walking up the stairs and you see a shadow. Like it kind of gave off similar vibes to that.
Yeah, it's that sort of thing. And like when you see in his room too, like when you're in the kid's room, it's like his room is just so large and there's like nothing on the walls. That it has a very like, this is not quite the real world. Like this is almost the real world, but not quite kind of look to it.
Sure. All right. So I guess moving on to the next one, and this is one that I know for a fact, Mimi, you wanted to put on your list, but I kind of beat you to the punch, is Michael Dougherty's Trick or Treat, which I don't think it's quite as good as Creepshow in terms of horror anthologies, but I actually really loved Trick or Treat. I think it's
well, whether it's as good as Creepshow or not, it's more Halloween-y.
Yeah, no, I can. Well, I mean, of course, because the plot literally revolves around Halloween. But no, I really enjoy Trick or Treat. I think it's a really fun and occasionally pretty scary little movie. But I think it's a really great one to watch on Halloween.
Well, yeah, this I can't think of many other movies that really do like immerse themselves in Halloween atmosphere as much as Trick or Treat does.
Yeah. And I actually kind of love the fact too that like Michael Dougherty basically based the movie around the fact that like there's no real, at the time there wasn't really an icon for Halloween. Like you had the Easter Bunny, you had Santa Claus, you had Cupid, but you didn't really have anything for Halloween. So he created Sam, who's like the icon of Halloween. And, it started off as like an animated short he made back in the 90s. And then that grew into the movie, which I think is more or less solidified Sam as like the icon of horror. At least to me, it does.
Yeah, I love Sam. I mean, he's a great mixture of like cute and scary at the same time. And and I like the fact that he's a trick-or-treater who, he's like who like punishes people for not being in the spirit of Halloween, because a lot of the time in horror movies the trick-or-treaters are like the victims,
Yeah.
usually, like they'll go to a house and there'll be somebody scary there or something. In this movie they kind of reverse it so that the trick-or-treater is the monster, and the curmudgeonly old man who, the grumpy old man whose house he visits is the victim.
Yeah, you're talking about the scene with Brian Cox, that is definitely one of my favorite moments, where he's like this almost kind of Ebenezer Scrooge for Halloween, and then Sam comes and basically wrecks his shit until later he's got covered in bandages and he's like reluctantly giving kids candy because he knows like if he doesn't, Sam's gonna like kill him.
Yeah, what do you think with the segment at the beginning with the guy who kind of looks like the protagonist of Falling Down and or the Angry Video Game Nerd?
Oh, you're talking about Dylan Baker's character.
Yeah.
I mean, for one, like I feel like that dude, he's one of those actors who is like kind of destined to play creeps in movies, sort of like that one guy whose name escapes me. He was in X-Men Origins Wolverine, and I think he was the head vampire in 30 Days of Night. Like he's one of those actors he looks like a creep and is like destined to play a creep.
Yeah, what's his name? That guy who's in that guy who's in all the Rob Zombie movies, and he was like Joe Chill in Batman Begins. What's that guy's name again?
I couldn't tell you. I can look it up really quick, but yeah, like I said before, Dylan Baker, he's just one of those guys who is just destined to play creeps, and I mean, to his credit, he does it really well. Like he's almost kind of like a bit of a more extreme version of Sam, where like Sam, like obviously is like, you know, all about keeping the spirit of Halloween alive, but Dylan Baker's character is like a more extreme version of that. Like he's willing to like outright kill people in sadistic ways if they don't keep the tradition of Halloween alive.
Oh, but by the way, Richard Brake was the actor I was thinking of. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Yeah, I was looking it up and I was gonna say it's Richard Brake.
Yeah.
But I was
that guy.
But I was gonna
he was
say
also in Barbarian recently. Also he was the he played a creep in that movie also.
yeah. Well, go figure. But no, I think one of my favorite segments in the movie is the Anna Paquin segment, where, again, kind of the inversion thing you were talking about before. Like, you go into it thinking it's going to be like, oh, she's going to be like the helpless victim, and Dylan Baker's going to, like, you know, rape her or whatever. But then they kind of twist it around by being like, no, she's actually the one luring him into a trap. And it has, in my opinion, one of the best werewolf transformations ever, because like usually in movies with werewolves, like the characters will like grow into the werewolf, but in that movie they like tear each other's skin off and reveal that they're like werewolves underneath, and that's something I don't think I had ever seen before prior to Trick or Treat. And the werewolf transformation's probably my favorites. Well, I don't know if I'd say it's my favorite, but it's one of my favorite scenes of the movie.
Yeah, and I know Michael Dougherty, after he made like the ultimate Halloween themed horror movie, he went on to do Krampus, like to try and make the ultimate Christmas themed horror movie. And I like that one too, but not as much.
No, I would agree. I thought Krampus was a lot of fun. Definitely kind of had a bit of a Gremlins vibe to it. I agree that it's not quite as good as Trick or Treat, but I do still really love Krampus. I actually put it on my list of what I call the 12 best alternative Christmas classics, which I did a video on that too a little while back.
One thing I'll say about Dougherty too is I feel like he's a director who he uses the right balance of like CG and practical effects instead of over relying on one or the other. Like, you know, you watch a movie like Krampus, I feel like that's got a pretty perfect balance of the two, depending on, because a lot of directors, you know, they either over rely on like CG creature effects, or they try to go the opposite direction, you know, to appeal to people who don't like CG. And but practical effects have their own limitations too. So I'm saying I feel like you know, his movies, I kind of point to them as having the right balance, you know, same as something like Hellboy 2, right? That's also got, I feel like, a good balance.
I could see that. So I guess what springboarding off of that, what's the next movie on your list?
Let's see. I guess next I'll talk about House. And I'm not talking about the Japanese House, which is it's its own beast. I'm talking about the American House, because I'm a patriot.
Yeah, exactly. No, I was gonna actually make that joke. Like, are you talking about the Japanese House or the American House? But yeah, I knew you were talking about the American House. This is another one of those movies that I had heard a lot about, but I just, for whatever reason, never got around to watching it. But from the clips
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you continue.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, everybody's seen the Evil Dead movies, right? Everybody loves those. I love those. I'm going to mention House because it is an Evil Dead-esque movie from the same era that's not quite as famous.
Yeah.
Like this movie has a lot of similarities to Evil Dead 2, even though it came out between Evil Dead 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Like it's got similar like a similar kind of mix of like horror and comedy. It's got a similar like guy dealing with a severed hand, you know, bit that Evil Dead 2 has, but it came out first, and it's got some cool monsters. It's got a sort of thing that you see a lot of horror movies now try to incorporate more, which is like traumatic flashbacks, because the main character, he was in the Vietnam War, and they keep flashing back to that, to try to give the film like deeper themes. But it's a little weird given the kind of campy comedic tone that a lot of the horror stuff has. But yeah, it ends. You might be seeing the ghoul he fights toward the end there, which is supposedly one of his former soldiers he fought with come back to haunt him for abandoning him. And
Yeah.
that's a cool element. They're kind of it's just kind of a fun haunted house movie with a handful of different creatures in it throughout.
Yeah, like I said, from the clips I've seen, it does look like a lot of fun, and I kind of wanted to point out too that one of the writers of the film is a personal favorite of mine, and actually has a movie on my list. But Fred Decker, who wrote among other things, Night of the Creeps, which is I didn't put that on my list, but that's a really fun kind of mixture of like monster movie meets sci-fi meets romance meets college hijinks. But yeah, from the clips I've seen of House, it definitely does seem like something he would have written, because it has that kind of like playful yet scary kind of vibe.
Yeah, if you like the Evil Dead movies and you want to see something kind of similar though in like a suburban setting instead of the wilderness, it's kind of like a nice suburban house where that seems to have some kind of doorway to the spirit world in it. You'll probably enjoy it.
Right on. All right, so I guess kind of on that same note of like fun, but maybe with a twinge of horror. This one might be a bit of an obvious pick, but I don't care. It's my list. Beetlejuice. I mean, I don't know if there's much else I can say about it that hasn't already been said. It's one of my personal favorite Tim Burton movies, and whether or not you enjoyed the sequel, I still think the original is a classic that still holds up to this day.
Yeah, and it's got a lot of style to it. It's got a good variety of effects. There's a part of you that almost worries, like, if Tim Burton made this later, would it be sort of garish and weird looking? But it's, and would it all be CG? I don't know. But it has, and would Johnny Depp be Beetlejuice? Probably. But it's got a lot of it's got that cool mixture of different techniques, and it kind of, I like that it kind of creates, it was potent for a sequel because it does create its own world and its own mythology that you only get glimpses of in the first movie.
Yeah. And the thing I always just find so funny about this movie is the fact that it got so mainstream, because it's like, when you look at it, just even at like stills of it, it is like the least mainstream looking movie you can imagine. It's just so weird and out there and just tonally all over the place, and yet somehow it became a huge hit that even spawned an animated series. And it's just like,
yeah,
it's just so weird that a movie like, I mean, not that I'm saying I didn't want it to catch on, I'm glad it did. It's just, this is like one of those movies you would never expect to get so much attention.
Well, the thing is, I kind of compare Beetlejuice to Shrek in a weird way, and I'll explain what I mean. Which is that when both came out, they were kind of these weird, gross, edgy family films that were kind of inappropriate for kids, but that kids watched anyway. And but then they went on to spawn a lot of movies that were trying to imitate the same kind of tone, which in a way detracts from them. Beetlejuice spawned, I mean, some of these movies have their fans, but it spawned a bunch of movies like Little Monsters, Drop Dead Fred, Monkey Bone. I would even I would argue The Mask to a lesser extent than its sequel, Son of the Mask. But I would even argue that the two live action Dr. Seuss movies, The Grinch and Cat in the Hat, were both kind of trying to be like Beetlejuice. Like, they sort of took the titular characters and tried to make them Beetlejuice like, make them like horny and fast talking and persona changing and all that.
Nah, I can see that, especially with like the Little Monsters and Drop Dead Fred comparison, and I guess to an extent Monkey Bone, which it's funny you mentioned that because that movie was directed by Henry Selick, who also directed Nightmare Before Christmas, despite what
Yeah,
people,
he did.
which this,
And I will say this: Monkey Bone has a lot of style too. It has just as much visual style as Beetlejuice, but that's
Yeah.
not why people dislike it.
Yeah, no. But yeah, with Beetlejuice, I mean, it is also kind of funny that like its title character only is in it for like maybe 15 minutes at the most, and yet again, he's like the title character and the one that everybody remembers the most.
Yeah, he's not in it as much as you'd expect him to be.
Yeah, it's sort of like when you watch Hellraiser, and even though Pinhead is front and center on the poster, he doesn't show up until like maybe 40 minutes or so into the movie.
Yeah, and Beetlejuice also tries to forcibly marry an underage girl in the movie, but then obviously in the animated series they're just friends.
Yeah, and not to spoil too much of the sequel, but he does try to remarry Lydia, but you know, it's okay because she's much older in the sequel as opposed to being a teenager in the original.
Yeah, I mean he's Beetlejuice. He's matured. He wants a gilf now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
he's grown a lot. He's grown a lot from his perverted youth.
Yeah, but no, like I said, Beetlejuice is definitely among my favorite Tim Burton movies, alongside Batman '89 and Ed Wood. But again, I don't feel like there's much else we can say that hasn't already been said. It's just a fun time. If you haven't seen it, what the hell are you doing? Go watch it. So, Mimi, what's next on your list?
I think next on my list, I'm going to talk about a movie that's a little obvious, but I love it deeply. It's probably one of my favorite movies in general, which is Coraline, another Henry Selick film.
Yeah, I was going to say, speaking,
you know,
of...
we just talked about Selick, so it's a good transition into Coraline.
Yeah, no, I really enjoy Coraline, though I might be a little treading on water a little bit. I actually kind of like Paranorman a little bit more. Don't get me wrong, I think Coraline is a really fun and kind of spooky movie, but Paranorman I just think is a lot more of a fun watch, but that's just me personally.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. The thing is, I like Coraline so much that none of the later films made by Laika or Henry Selick, because I guess Wendell and Wild wasn't Laika, but it kind of feels like a Laika movie because he directed it.
Sure.
None of the ones they've done since then I've liked as much. I feel like they kind of came out of the gate with their best material and haven't made anything as good since. But I haven't seen every one they've done, but I don't think I've seen The Missing Link, for example. But I didn't really get into Paranorman as much. I didn't get into like Kubo and the Two Strings as much.
Yeah.
I didn't get into, like I said, Wendell and Wild as much. But Coraline, I just think is a perfectly constructed movie, and a lot of that owes to the book that it's based on, but it makes some changes to the book that I think are pretty. I actually think they're good changes. One of the only change I'm kind of iffy about is they took out the creepy little song that the rats sing, and I'm a sucker for that trope. I love creepy little rhymes designed to warn of you know, nearby evil or whatever in horror movies. So it's unfortunate that they cut that, but otherwise I like the film a lot. I think it looks really good. It doesn't look quite as seamless like some of the later Laika movies. It's almost like they're so perfectionistic and so like technically show offy that you almost get to a point where you wonder like, why didn't you just make this in CG? It looks like CG already. Coraline is not quite there yet.
Yeah, no.
It's got a lot of great little moments, like just little things like Coraline entering the door by hanging on of her new home by hanging on it at the beginning, or her like trying to stamp that elevated part out of the carpet. Just little moments like that feel very real to me.
Yeah,
and it really feels like you're kind of entering this world with this character. Like that's just stuff a kid would do.
Yeah,
and
Sorry,
go on.
I was just gonna say, it's been a long time since I've seen Coraline, but I do remember really liking it. It's got this like almost kind of like a kid's version of a Nightmare sort of thing, where like you were kind of mentioning hitting on it before, like entering this child's perspective. Like that's kind of what Coraline feels like. It's like seeing like a child's nightmare version of reality. Like with the whole concept of like the button eyes, just kind of like these dead, lifeless eyes, kind of like Quint's speech from Jaws or Dr. Loomis's little speech from Halloween. Just this idea of like cold, dead eyes that just have no life to them, and like this whole, and also like the fact that in this nightmare world, Coraline imagines her father as like this kind of like I'm trying to think of the right word for it, like kind of put upon, like kind of demasculated guy, and her mother is like this big domineering figure that like controls everything, and in her nightmare perception she's like a witch. But no, it's one I definitely need
Yeah,
to
I mean, that's one way to read it. I mean, in the text itself, the other mother is the creature who created this world for her, so that's why she kind of has the witch-like appearance toward the end, as her body sort of mutates. And I will say, the thing about the movie too is, how do I put this? Yeah, it is. I mean, it is. If you watch this movie as a kid, I mean, this is a PG movie that manages to tell a horror story within the constraints of that, you know, without any blood or anything. And it is legitimately scary to watch if you're a kid. I mean, it might be, you know, if you're an adult watching it, it's maybe scary in a different way, at least if you're like a parent watching it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know it kind of, my brother watched it at a very young age and was very kind of traumatized by it, unfortunately, but nowadays he respects it a lot. And it's got it's got a lot of great visuals. A lot of the characters are well designed, I think, and they sort of, I just don't know what, because this is a movie that you could really spend a lot of time analyzing, and a lot of people, because I talk about Cobweb and how that's kind of like fairy tale horror, like from a kid's perspective. Coraline is the same thing, but it's a much better movie than Cobweb is, even though I like both of them.
That's
so
fair.
Yeah, if you're one of the few people who haven't seen Coraline, I strongly recommend it.
No, yeah, absolutely. I would totally recommend it too. And I'm checking the chat right now. Goodley is saying, I remember rewatching the Grinch and hearing him scream "Spread Eagle" at the finale and thinking, damn, how much foul shit was in this. I'm here for it though. And I'm guessing he meant to say awkward. That happens in serious unfortunate events, both the first book and the movie. I got you. Now I was gonna say, to kind of tangent a little bit. I remember rewatching The Grinch. Like there are little jokes in it that I never got as a kid that I'm like, now I see and I'm like, oh wow, I'm surprised they're able to get away with that. Like when
it's like I said, I think they were using Beetlejuice as a reference point for how to write the Grinch in that movie.
Yeah, but no, I'm thinking of like when the Grinch is like, foster parents are explaining how like who children are like delivered in like little baskets that float from the sky, and one lands in front of a house, and the husband goes outside and he's like, "Hey honey, our baby's here," and then he looks closer to the basket and he goes, "He looks just like your boss." And at the time I was like, wait, what does that mean? But now as I get older I'm like, oh,
that's another, by the way, that's another element that comes from Beetlejuice, is just like the hateful, cynical depiction of American suburbia that you see in a lot of these similar movies.
Yeah, no, I can see that. But yeah, I'm with Mimi. Definitely give Coraline a watch. Again, I am planning on, I might rewatch it at some point because it's been years since I've seen it. But moving on, my next pick is this one might also be fairly obvious, but I still really love it. Young Frankenstein, which I know a lot of people say is Mel Brooks' best movie, and don't get me wrong, I love Young Frankenstein, but I've always been a bit more of a Blazing Saddles fan personally. Just that movie just kind of has more of an edge to it. But Young Frankenstein is still a really fun like parody / send up of all the old Universal monster movies.
Yeah, well, it's the right kind of parody where they accurately try to recreate the look of what it is they're parodying and the feel of it, so that way when funny stuff happens, it feels like an intrusion upon what could almost be a serious movie.
Yeah, like they reenact the blind man scene from Bride of Frankenstein, but they like kind of subvert it by having like all these goofy shenanigans happen where like when they're toasting, the blind man accidentally breaks the monster's cup, or like in the smoking scene, he accidentally lights his thumb on fire and the monster runs out. And I always love little fun fact, so Gene Hackman was the blind man in the scene, and at the very end he improvises his line where he's like, wait, where are you going? I was gonna make espresso. I love that.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen this one. I actually saw it on TV years ago, so I don't know if my memory of everything about it is too specific. But this is the point where Igor had kind of fully formed as a character with everything we now associate with him. Because really, in the old Frankenstein movies, obviously Igor is. There's a character named Igor in the third movie, but he doesn't have the hunch. And there's like a different character who is Frankenstein's assistant in the first movie. And Igor, what we think of today as Igor really is like a fusion of several different characters from those movies.
Yeah. Now it's pronounced Igor.
Yeah, and you see him fully realized by the time that Young Frankenstein has come out, or well, you know, it's pronounced Frankenstein, right? They do that joke too.
Yeah. But no, going back to the old Frankenstein movies, in the first movie he does have an assistant named Fritz, and like you were saying, in the third one, Ghost of Frankenstein, there is a character named Igor who I believe actually does have like a hunchback, but he's definitely a lot different than how people normally depict the Igor character. Like, he's kind of conniving and sinister, like he's got his own little agenda versus being like a faithful servant.
By the way, speaking of which, I'm going to point out, honorable mention. I'm going to give an honorable mention to a movie that could have been a Halloween classic, but I don't think quite makes it, which is the movie Igor. That's not going to be one of my recommendations, but that is a movie I have kind of a soft spot for. I like a lot of the ideas in it, but I don't think it. And I kind of like the visual design of the world, even though it's a little cheap looking. But it doesn't. It's not quite a good movie, so I don't feel like I can recommend it.
That's fair. But another thing about Young Frankenstein that I also really love is because Mel Brooks was very much about attention to detail. Like, he wanted to film it in black and white, and this is at a time when nobody was really doing black and white movies anymore. So he actually had to bring in like guys who had long since retired because they knew how to properly light a black and white movie. And in fact, all the lab equipment in the movie was taken literally from the set of Frankenstein from 1931. And I do like how it not only kind of pokes fun and homages like the Frankenstein movies, but it even throws in like some Dracula and the Wolfman a little bit. I will admit, as a kid, I liked it, but I didn't quite get it. But now that I've kind of sunk my teeth into the Universal monsters, I feel like I appreciate it a lot more now, getting all the references to stuff I didn't pick up on back then. And I also love the fact too that like when this is actually a really hard movie for them to film because they kept like busting out laughing because of how funny it was. Like I know there's a story about how when they were filming the candle scene where Gene Wilder is spun around when Terry Gard takes the candle out and he goes, "Put the candle back." The first time they filmed it, Cloris Leachman, who was off screen, was laughing so hard that she ruined the take, so they had to do the whole scene over again. And that kind of shows you right there just how funny it is when even the people working on it couldn't help themselves from laughing. But
well, you know, there are some movies you watch where you get the feeling like, hey, they were probably laughing hard at this on set, but it doesn't really translate to the audience. But I feel like in Young Frankenstein, it generally does.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's not much else that I can say about Young Frankenstein that hasn't already been said, other than just it's a really fun movie. Like, it's definitely a lot more fun if you're familiar with the Universal monsters, but even if you haven't watched any of the Universal monster movies, it's still like really funny. It's got some pretty iconic performances. I mean, Gene Wilder, of course, is great. Peter Boyle's a lot of fun as the monster. I'm trying to remember the actor's name. The guy who plays the inspector. I'm gonna like hit myself not remembering what his name was. But the guy playing the inspector is really funny. And it's just got so many great lines. What's his? Kenneth Mars. That's it. Kenneth Mars is a lot of fun. Yeah, it's just a comedy classic. I can't say anything more about it. So I guess moving on. What's your next pick, Mimi?
I want to talk about Over the Garden Wall next. This pick is a bit of a cheat because it's not a movie, it's a miniseries. But
Okay.
if you watch the whole thing together, the runtime is about the length of a movie, so I don't care.
All right, fair enough.
I kind of treat it like one.
So what exactly is Over the Garden Wall? Because I think prior to you and I discussing this, I had never heard of Over the Garden Wall before.
Well, Over the Garden Wall came out. It was a mini series that came out on Cartoon Network in 2014, so it's about a decade old now. It was part of what I call that sort of post-Adventure Time wave of cartoons that you could almost argue is still, I don't know if we're out of that yet, but you can kind of see some of Adventure Time in it in terms of like the animation style and kind of the way the dialogue is written, but it's its own thing, and the thing is, I would actually argue that Over the Garden Wall works really well both for Halloween and for Thanksgiving because it's just kind of a general fall time show.
I got you.
It's because it's got a lot of spooky Halloween kind of elements, but there is also just this kind of Americana quality to it. It's like the sort of like 19th century New England kind of setting that feels very Thanksgiving to me.
I got you.
And it's 10 episodes that are each 11 minutes. It's the story of these two brothers, Greg and Wirt, who are lost in this strange wilderness, and they start they start encountering like like weird things, like they meet a talking bird, and they meet a bunch of strange characters, and they're kind of being pursued by a mysterious sort of entity called the Beast that everybody keeps warning them about. And
Right.
I can't really say too much about the series without spoiling it, but I will say if you enjoy stuff like, it really does feel like a throwback to like kind of turn of the century, like late 19th, early 20th century, like children's entertainment. Like it feels like it's kind of channeling things like Alice in Wonderland or like the Wizard of Oz books from that era.
Okay.
It has that kind of quality where it's just you're in this land and you just keep coming across these really bizarre characters, and it's kind of episodic. But it's a very good series. It's like I said, the animation in it is like TV quality, but it has a lot of atmosphere despite that fact. It's got a lot of these great backgrounds kind of styled by Nick Cross, who I'm a big fan of as an animation artist.
Okay.
And it's got really likable characters. It's got a few kind of memorable jokes to it. Oh yeah, Sleepy Hollow, by the way, that's another kind of reminds me of it is like I said, but the one thing I will say about the show too is that it probably has the all-time best soundtrack for an American animated show that I can think of, at least relative to the limited number of episodes it has. Like the soundtrack by the Blasting Company is unbelievably good. I listen to it every year or around autumn. Lots of good songs, lots of good instrumentals. So yeah, I strongly recommend watching it. I think it belongs up there with things like Coraline and kind of the same category and
All right.
level of quality.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely will give this one a watch. I believe it's available on Hulu. And you say it's only 10 episodes and they're about 11 minutes each. I think that's a pretty.
It's the length. It's like I said, it's the length of a movie when you add them up.
All right. But yeah, I will definitely give it a watch sometime because it definitely sounds really interesting. Not usually something in my wheelhouse, but I'm always willing to check out something different. But anyway, so the next pick for me is, again, this is another one that's probably really obvious, but I feel like you can't really talk about Halloween movies without talking about the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I mean, it's probably the most mainstream cult movie of all time. but it is still a lot of fun. It's got great musical numbers. They do a pretty good job of like like kind of poking fun at like all the movie tropes, especially like sci-fi and horror of like the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I mean, of course, you got Tim Curry as Dr. Frankenfurter, who's like just, I mean, he is a really fun character to watch and just see him like completely dominate the screen. But I mean, I guess there's not much else I can say about Rocky Horror that hasn't already been said. Other than just, I think it's a lot of fun. Probably gets a bit too much attention, especially because I still think Shock Treatment deserves as much cult status as Rocky Horror, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and it kind of, in a way, I feel it kind of paved the way for like the horror musical genre, which, you know, if that makes any sense, like the sort of campy horror musical, which is, it's a very niche genre, but you know, things like Little Shop of Horrors or like Repo the Genetic Opera, which we actually watched this month, which is a movie, again, honorable mention. It's not really a good movie, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
And you know, movies like that.
Yeah, well, I would argue that Phantom of the Paradise kind of like falls in that same niche, and that came out a year before Rocky Horror, and that's one I think also deserves as much cult status as Rocky Horror, because it's been a few years since I've seen it, but I remember really loving Phantom of the Paradise.
Yeah, that one just doesn't, I don't think that one went on to be as influential, though.
Yeah, that's
really, like,
that's true.
It's a little more niche.
Yeah, but I mean, it is like, even though it is definitely more mainstream, it is still kind of impressive how it developed such a huge cult following, because like they played it initially in like regular showings and it didn't do very well, but then once they started playing it at midnight, that's when it really caught on.
I mean, I will say there are some movies that are technically cult films, you know, that bombed when they came out, but then got a cult following that are so pop culturally ubiquitous now that you don't think of them that way.
Yeah.
And you could argue Rocky Horror is one of those. I think of movies like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory as an example of a movie like that. So is so is The Iron Giant. So Scott Pilgrim versus the World, right? We don't really think of these as cult movies exactly anymore, but
yeah.
But I mean, you could argue Rocky Horror is in that category, but it still has those weird like midnight screenings and stuff, right?
Yeah,
it's famous for.
Yeah, it's still, they're still a thing. I've been to like one or two of them, and they're pretty fun. Though I always like to imagine, like, as a joke, I could be like just this asshole who goes into one of those screenings and is just like trying to watch the movie, and like everybody's like performing in front of the movie, and I just scream at them like, "Hey, down in front!" but no, I mean, again, it is. Like I was saying, and like kind of you were hinting at, it is like a very mainstream, it is one of those cult movies that has almost kind of lost its cult appeal just because of how like culturally ubiquitous it is, like you were saying, like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory or Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, where it is technically a cult film, but it's become so popular that it's no longer really a cult film.
But is it still good? That's the real question.
I mean, I enjoyed Rocky Horror. It's got a lot of great songs. Time Warp is a lot of fun. Sweet Transvestite. Meatloaf song, Hopatootie, Bless My Soul. And I'm trying to think of like, well, I don't know. All the songs in it are really catchy, and it is definitely a movie that's heavy on the camp, but I feel like it's more kind of a celebration of camp versus like some movies where they are like intentionally campy, but it feels like they're being that way as an excuse to make up for the fact that they're not good filmmakers, if that makes sense.
Oh no, I know what you're talking about.
But yeah, I guess we'll just kind of leave it at that. So, Mimi, what's next for you?
Next, I guess I'm gonna just briefly talk about a movie that we've already talked about once on stream, and that's Nightmare on Elm Street 3: Dream Warriors.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, there's not much else we can really say about it, other than just, I think it's the best one since the original, and maybe I know you said it's your favorite. there's not really much else that can be said. But I guess like for you, Mimi, what makes this a good like Halloween movie?
Well, what makes it a good Halloween movie is that it's got a variety of kind of exotic, fun visuals and kills to it, like more than the original does, but it's not
Yeah.
going into full on camp yet, like some of the later ones would. It's that right balance.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I mean, hey, it has, you know, some of these characters, you know, dressing up in costumes when they enter the dream world, you know, taking on these dream personas where they have special powers and stuff.
Yeah.
It has this satisfying quality of, hey, we can finally fight back against, you know, the villain who is so much more powerful than us in the previous movies. It's got that kind of satisfying element to it, but he still manages to kill a few of them, so it's not like a curb stomp. And it's got something I don't know if I talked about. It's got that stop motion bit with the skeleton, which is one part of it that maybe doesn't hold up the best, but is very Halloween-y. You know, fighting a stop motion skeleton, you know, that of course is strong enough to throw these guys around despite being made out of bones.
Yeah.
You know, that's delightful.
Yeah, and then there's also the other stop motion bit where like the marionette turns into like a little Freddy and like scurries away. I
mean that's great. You wouldn't see I mean, what other 80s slasher would do that, right? It's great. Yeah. And that like I said, that puppet kill is the best kill I think in any of the movies, where the guy's like innards get ripped out of his arms and he's puppeted, you know, they're used as strings to puppet him to his own suicide. I mean, that's like creative, but that's a little like creative and goofy, but also horrifying at the same time. Again, it's that perfect balance.
Yeah, and I think speaking of the balance, that's one aspect of Nightmare 3 that I do love, is like, because this is the one that introduced humor to the franchise, where Freddy was like making quips and jokes, but like they still like made him scary. Like even though he is making wisecracks, he's still like threatening. Versus like the later Nightmare movies where they leaned much more heavy into the comedy. Like in 3, they kept it much more of a balance where, you know, you've got like the "welcome to prime time, bitch" mixed in with like him with a Jennifer Rubin when his fingers turn to syringes and he's like, "let's get high." Like it definitely achieves that mixture of like horror and humor a lot better.
And it's just like I said, it's a well-paced movie. You know, it walks you through these set pieces at a good pace, which a lot of slashers back then didn't. And it's got also, you know, they reveal more about Freddy's backstory, but in a way that kind of makes him more horrifying instead of less. Which is nice. It doesn't detract from him like some later things they added might have.
And you can also say
that's all great about it.
And you can also say that you watched a movie from the director of The Mask. But I guess on that note, my next pick is, it might be a little outside of what we were talking about before, but for me, Night of the Living Dead is like one of the ultimate Halloween movies. Partially because the first time I ever saw it was on Halloween. But I mean, not that this is like the first zombie movie, because they had been around before this, but Night of the Living Dead was what kind of set the template for what we consider zombie movies. But even outside of its historical context, I still think it's a really, really well done movie.
Yeah, it created a genre so big that we just call them zombie movies instead of calling them Night of the Living Dead clones.
Yeah, that's true. But like, outside of its historical context, I think it's really effective. It's got like this kind of nightmarish quality to it. Especially like in some of the kill scenes, like the one where the little girl's like stabbing her mother to death with like a little shovel. Like the way it's filmed and the sounds of it, it's like, it kind of makes it more like nightmarish and scary. And like, yeah, it definitely does have like a lo-fi DIY vibe to it, especially with like the obvious like animal intestines they use, and the fact that all the fake blood is like chocolate syrup. But I feel like the lo-fi quality to it kind of gives it a bit more of a charm to it, that like you can tell that this is made by people who had no other pretensions to them. They just wanted to make a horror film, and they set out to do it, and they just happened to make a masterpiece. But yeah, Mimi, you were telling me before that you hadn't seen Night of the Living Dead before, right?
Yes, I'm embarrassed by this fact, but I keep meaning to get around to watching through George Romero's Of the Dead, trilogy, but I guess it's something I keep forgetting about.
Yeah.
And I guess I wasn't going to watch it until I was ready until I had them all lined up. But I'll get to it.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm real sorry. I'm a fake horror. I haven't seen Night of the Living Dead. I've seen all these obscure movies, but not one of the most important horror movies of all time. Sorry.
No, you're totally fine. I mean, if it makes you feel any better, I'm sure there's a lot of like really significant horror movies that I've never seen before. But I can't say enough good things about Night of the Living Dead. And it's also kind of interesting how like a lot of people have kind of picked up on like these racial connotations to the film simply because like the lead actor was a black guy. And in the movie there's like tension between him and like this other family, namely with the father who's white. And like a lot of people have interpreted that as being like a metaphor for the civil rights movement, which was very big at the time. But it's kind of funny that people throw in that subtext when George Romero only hired the actor Dwayne Jones to play the part because he thought he was the best actor who auditioned for the part. But
now would you say that like later on, because when you get to like Land of the Dead, that's after decades of George Romero being told by people that the social commentary is so great in his movies, so he really leaned into it there. Would you agree with that or not?
To an extent,
with that narrative.
To an extent, I would, but I would say that kind of happened way before Land of the Dead, because like Dawn of the Dead kind of has some social commentary, like equating mall shoppers to zombies, because back in like 78 or whenever that came out, shopping malls were kind of a new thing, and Romero kind of saw people like aimlessly wandering through the malls, going to different shops as being kind of like zombies. And then with Day of the Dead,
it's like when a zombie movie. It's like when people today, draw people on their damn iPhones as zombies, right? Like when people like Steve Cutts do that sort of thing.
All right, okay, Boomer, you can go eat your tapioca and let us kids handle
Well, that's
things.
what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. George Romero was,
Yeah,
he was comparing mall shoppers to zombies. This was way before smartphones.
Yeah, but and then also like in Day of the Dead, it was kind of meant to be sort of a commentary about like the military versus like the more intellectual types. Because I think in the 80s, like
foxes versus lions in Machiavellian terms.
Yeah. And Goodley draws a saying, pretty sure that inspired the Dead Rising series of games. Yeah, it's funny how a lot of like stuff post Dawn of the Dead took after Dawn of the Dead, namely the whole shopping mall thing. Because I mean, you had Dead Rising, you also had Left 4 Dead had a level in a shopping mall.
This Of the Dead movie series. I mean, this is where the genre of zombie outbreak comes from, right? So of course you'd see elements of it in later things.
Yeah, but actually one final thing about Night of the Living Dead I will say is that like a lot of not just zombie movies but zombie fiction tries to like give some kind of explanation for where the zombies came from. In Night of the Living Dead, like you get a bit of an explanation, but aside from that, like there's no like build up to it. It's just, first 5 minutes, bam, zombies show up. Like, where did it come from? How were they created? I don't know. I mean, maybe a space probe from Venus exploded and brought radiation. I don't know. And I think that makes it scarier, the fact that there's no explanation for where they came from.
Yes, I mean, sometimes it's kind of like sometimes it's better to not have that explanation for the fantastical element in the story.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know a lot of people have talked about this, but like when M. Night Shyamalan did the movie Old, right? That was adapted from a story called The Sandcastle about a beach that causes you to age rapidly when you're there.
Yeah.
The comic didn't try to explain anything.
Mm-hmm.
The movie does, and the explanation is kind of bizarre.
Yeah.
But
Or I'm thinking of like when Rob Zombie did his Halloween remake, and he tried to give Michael Myers more of a backstory, which inadvertently made him less scary because it like gave him this tragic.
I think he that movie very much. This was right on that movie very much plays out like a lot of those like Jeff the Killer knockoff creepypastas that came shortly after it, where it's just like, we're going to show you the terrible childhood of this kid, and it's going to end with him becoming a killer, and you're going to kind of cheer him on because everybody was so terrible to him.
Yeah.
It's like it's a lot of those like kind of creepypasta stories follow the same formula as Rob Zombie's Halloween, and it was around the same era, so I wonder if they were kind of partly inspired by it. But it is that sort of thing where it's like, we're just going to make everyone in this character's life a horrible asshole to explain why they're evil.
No, I can see that. It makes a lot of sense. But speaking of zombie movies, you had a zombie movie on your list, so did you want to talk about that?
Yes, I did. I was going to talk about that next. Brain Dead, aka Dead/Alive, directed by Peter Jackson.
Yeah.
This was, I want to say his third movie, because I think I believe Meet the Feebles and Bad Taste came before this, and This may be a controversial opinion in our circles, but I don't think either of those movies hold up especially well today, even if the behind the scenes is interesting. Whereas I think Brain Dead holds up really, really well.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was just gonna say,
go on.
No, I definitely agree with that, because like I enjoy Bad Taste and Meet the Feebles, but I do agree that like, because I enjoy low budget movies that have a very DIY quality to them. But I can understand people looking at them and just thinking they're just a bunch of dumb bullshit. But no, Brain Dead, I think, definitely holds up, because even though it is low budget, it's a lot more polished. It's a lot better. It's a much better looking film on a technical level. Like, even though there are still some effects that look kind of cheap by today's standards, you can tell that like Peter Jackson had a lot more money to work with than he did on Bad Taste or Meet the Feebles. But actually, kind of going to the title, I should mention, like, everywhere in the world it's referred to as Brain Dead, except in the US it's called Dead Alive, because there already was a movie called Brain Dead from Roger Corman, and I personally never liked the title Dead Alive. It just never sounded right. Like, Brain Dead, I feel like that title rolls off the tongue better.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And this movie, how do I put this? You hear it hyped up a lot. You hear it hyped up as like the goriest movie ever. And you go into it, and there's some gore toward the beginning, but and there's some gross out, but it's not until I want to say the last like 30 minutes of this movie are completely insane. It's one of the best climaxes you'll ever see for a horror movie. It's a climax that goes on for a long time, which tends to annoy me in a lot of movies, but in this one, it's never boring. Yeah.
Well, just because it just goes. No, go on. It goes for the extreme. Like it's pretty much like a Looney Tunes cartoon, but with gore. Like, it's just so ridiculously over the top that you can't take it seriously.
It is very, it is very splat stick. It is in the same kind of tone as something like Evil Dead 2, but it's the gore levels are even more extreme than they are in that movie. And it's got I like Sam Raimi's directing style a little better than I like Peter Jackson's, at least at this time, but it's still a really well-made movie. It's got what I like about it is a zombie movie, but it does something different with zombies. It's not just using them to do the same kind of story or the same kind of theming that most zombie outbreak stories do. It's basically a guy who his mom gets zombified, and he has to basically keep her locked in his basement, and she keeps getting out and infecting more people, and he's got to keep more people locked in his basement. So it's just this one guy essentially trying to contain a zombie outbreak. And and all the problems that arise in his life as a consequence of that.
Yeah. And I was gonna say, Tim Baum, I think, does a really great job as Lionel. Just this really kind of meek, like kind of pussified guy who eventually like kind of grows up and becomes a man as he decimates hundreds of zombies with a lawnmower. But one of my other favorite characters is Uncle Les, who's just this absolute slime ball of a human, but he's just so much fun to watch, like as he's hitting on Lionel's girlfriend and just being a complete creep and asshole to everyone around him. And like threat.
I like that he gets to be a little bit helpful during the climax. They don't just immediately kill him off, even though they do.
Yeah, and also like even some of the minor characters are a lot of fun. Like of course there's the kung fu priest who, as he says, kicks ass for the Lord, which that is
that's the one like part of the movie where I almost feel like if you put that in a movie today, people would view that as like Reddit humor. It's the one almost weird out of place thing, but I still find it funny.
Yeah, and actually, I don't know if this would count as out of place, but one bit of trivia I always loved about it is because Peter Jackson managed to finish this film on time and under budget, but he had some time and some money left over, so he decided to throw in one more scene, and it's not a gore scene. It's the scene where so in the movie there are two zombies who have sex and they have a child, which if you just go with it, and Lionel decides to take the baby in a stroller to a park, and that's the new scene they threw in, and there's no gore in it, but it's just such a ridiculous slapstick moment that it does feel a little out of place, but it's also just really funny seeing this grown man like
that one doesn't feel out of place to me because it's related to the I when I say the kung fu priest is out of place, I just mean like we're just randomly introducing this other kind of weird element that has nothing to do with the zombies.
Yeah. But no, I do love the park scene just because like it almost kind of plays like a Tom and Jerry cartoon where like this baby's like running around causing mischief and Lionel's like trying to get him under control and he ends up just beating the shit out of him, which I love. Like the one shot where you see the two moms watching him and they're in disgust, and then you got the drunken hobo behind them who's like, yeah, like cheering him on. It's great.
It's kind of like, I mean, you made the Looney Tunes comparison. It's like that specific, I think it's called Baby Buggy Bunny, that specific short where there's like a short criminal who disguises himself as a baby and then Bugs learns about it and starts beating him up, and if you walked into the cartoon halfway through and didn't know what was going on, it just looks like Bugs is abusing a baby.
Yeah, and and then of course the big climax like you were mentioning where the zombies finally break out of the basement and start tearing apart the party goers. Like that is definitely one of the biggest like gore scenes ever, where like people are getting their rib cages pulled out, guys are getting their faces ripped off, a woman like gets her heart pulled out. It's just nonstop chaos. And
a zombie gets cut in half, and then it's like internal organs start crawling around as a separate creature.
Yeah. And that's another thing I love about Brain Dead is that like it kind of plays. It doesn't really go by Night of the Living Dead rules. It's like it kind of does its own thing where like each part of the zombie is like its own independent creature. And the only way to like get rid of them is to just completely dismember them, like with a lawnmower. Or there's even a moment where Uncle Les is like just got like two knives in his hand and he's like massacring zombies as they come at him one by one. And then there's that pretty cool shot where he's like lighting a cigar while there's like twitching limbs in front of him.
I will say this too. Another thing I was going to say about the movie is, even though it is like the best movie ever made in terms of sheer quantity, it's not the most unpleasant or it's not like the most visceral gore, because a lot of it is very cartoony. It's not like something that's it's not the most like brutal, depressing thing to watch because of how gory it is. It's not like realistic gore.
Yeah, it's not like an Eli Roth movie where it just feels like gore for the sake of gore. Like it's definitely more.
Oh no, it feels like gore for the sake of gore to me. It's just not the most realistic gore.
Yeah, but it's more like gore for the sake of comedy. Like it's so it's so over the top with the gore that it's, you're not really meant to take it seriously. And I don't know, I mean, there's really not much else I think we can really say about it other than it's just a really fun zombie comedy with, it's got a little bit of everything. It's got a little bit of psycho. It's got a love story. It's got a zombie baby. It's got a kung fu priest. It's got, death by lawnmower. I mean,
it's still kind of, as far as zombie comedies, I want to say I probably could have put Shaun of the Dead on this list too, but for some reason, despite being a zombie movie, that doesn't feel very Halloween-y to me. It has, like, a lot of it's set during the daylight, and it's, I think it's mostly during daylight, and it's kind of a modern urban aesthetic. The zombies aren't that, like, wacky looking, but I'll throw that in as an honorable mention. It's just, it doesn't give enough Halloween vibes, but I like it as a comedy just as much.
Yeah. And I guess while we're still talking about zombies, I'll just throw in one more zombie movie, which is part of my list. But it's not related so much to Night of the Living Dead, but Return of the Living Dead is another one of my favorite zombie comedies. It's not entirely a Night of the Living Dead sequel, but it's kind of related, sort of, in the sense that, like, they reference Night of the Living Dead, and one of the
it's a sequel to the real story of Night of the Living Dead you didn't see, because the movie, the Hollywood, it's not Hollywood, it's independent, but the movie changed the details around because the government forced them to.
Yeah, no, exactly. It was all a big conspiracy. But no, I love Return of the Living Dead. Like, the comedy in it kind of stems from just the fact that, like, no matter what the characters do, everything just gets worse and worse. Like, they accidentally bang the drum, and that releases the gas into the warehouse, and, like, everything that's dead comes back to life, including a cadaver, which they managed to, like, cut up and then burn, but that just releases, like, the gas into the air, and that creates more zombies. And it never, like, nothing they ever do goes right. It all just goes further and further downhill, and that's what I think is so funny about it.
I will say this: I love Return of the Living Dead. It's a movie it's another one I probably would have put on my list if you didn't already. But this movie, how do I put this? This movie to me kind of rides the line between being like a fun horror movie and a depressing one, though. Because when you really sit back, it is a very depressing situation. Like you said, they keep trying everything they can to solve this problem, and nothing works until, well, I don't know if you want to spoil the ending, but I mean, and the zombies in this movie are, in a way, they are scarier than zombies in a lot of other movies, because they can run, they're fast,
they can
talk, they're intelligent, they're not, and in a way, like I would say the zombies in Brain Dead are kind of halfway between these and the Romero ones, but like in Return of the Living Dead, and these zombies also, they're pretty much impossible to kill. You would have to, like, vaporize them, basically, because any part you cut off will move on its own, and if you incinerate them, that just creates new problems.
Yeah. Which that actually leads into one of my favorite little moments in the movie, where they try to kill the cadaver by hitting it in the brain, and the three guys are like, I thought you said if we destroyed the brain it would die. It worked in the movie. Well, it ain't working now, Frank. You mean the movie lied? I love that. Yeah,
it's sort of it is an early, I guess, example of a horror movie where characters in it have watched other horror movies.
Yeah, it was meta. It was meta before meta was popular.
Yeah, this was before Scream. This was before even Friday the 13th Part 6, I think, where they also do that sort of humor.
Yeah.
And it's got or was it around the same time? I don't know, but it's got like a lot of things. It's got a lot of really entertaining kind of side characters in it. I mean, the guy who owns the place that they're at, the warehouse they're at, that guy. I mean, that guy's his actor leaves a real strong impression.
Yeah.
It's got, the punks are all really memorable. It's
what do you think this is?
Characters.
What do you think this is? You think this is a fucking costume? It's a way of life. I love that guy, and I love that they have names like Suicide and Trash.
Yeah,
and it's another movie where Linnea Quigley gets naked.
Yep, and it's a movie with it's also got the Tar Man, one of the most iconic zombies. I'm largely physical performance of the actor.
Yeah. brains. But
He's sort of he's the patient zero, so to speak, of the film,
yeah,
of
and
the zombie outbreak.
yeah, and one thing I always found funny about Linnea Quigley's nudity, because in the movie she like strips naked in a cemetery and then spends the rest of the movie more or less nude. What's funny is, like, if you look closely, you'll notice she has no, like, she has nothing down there. That's because if they did show it, the movie would have gotten an X rating. So they applied what they call the baby doll prosthetic to her to, like, cover it up. But it was so difficult to remove that she had to go for a very long time without using the bathroom. And I feel really bad for her knowing that. But
Oh yeah, one other thing. We talk about George Romero's Of the Dead series, like starting the zombie genre as we know it today. But Return of the Living Dead did create one very important aspect of the zombie genre that's kind of stuck around in a lot of unrelated media since then, which is the idea that they eat brains.
yeah,
And that they moan brains.
which
Yeah, that's very much thanks to Return of the Living Dead.
yeah, and I also Goodly pointed this out in the chat. I also kind of like how they give sort of an explanation for why they go for brains. It's because, like, you know, even though they're alive, they're still, like, in the middle of death, and they're still in pain because of it. And eating brains is the only way that can, like, the only thing that can relieve that pain. And I don't know, it kind of goes back into what you said before, that even though it is a comedy, it still has, like, some dark moments to it, like that. Or, like, the two main characters who accidentally unleash the plague are, like, slowly dying. And, like, it is really sad, like, seeing them, like, gradually wither and, like, show signs of death.
One of them puts himself in the incinerator toward the end, so before he can turn into a zombie.
Yeah, which I feel like that's the sign of a good horror comedy, is one where there's, like, that perfect balance between, like, horror and comedy. Like, it knows when to be it knows when to be funny, and it knows when to be serious.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I feel like this is one in particular, though, that kind of rides the line, like, more than that are kind of like House and stuff, or like Brain Dead. I feel more than those, actually, Return of the Living Dead kind of rides the line of actually being kind of a bummer and kind of scary to watch, but it has enough cute, but even though it has funny moments in it. And it's got so yeah, anything more to say about that one? Or
I guess the only thing I will say is, have you seen any of the sequels?
No, I have not.
I've only seen the first two, but it's been a long time. Part two kind of goes for more of the humor, and it largely doesn't work. Like, it's kind of childish in some of the humor. Like, they do a gag where, like, there's, like, one of the zombies is coming out of the ground while it's raining, and somebody steps on its head like it's a stone. There's a zombie who, of course, is dressed like Michael Jackson, and they do actually offer one way to kill the zombies, which is electrocution. But two, I just remember not being that much of a fan of. Three actually wasn't half bad. That in that one, the main girl is turned into a zombie, and, like, rather than, like, eating brains to suppress the pain, she, like, mutilates herself. Like, she sticks, like, shards of glass through her skin and, like, wraps herself in barbed wire. Like, she does all these things to repress her urge to feed. And again, it's been a long time since I've seen them, but part three I remember actually really liking.
I will say one thing about the movie I did remember is, weirdly, this is just some weird trivia. Roger Ebert actually liked this movie and gave it a positive review, and he usually didn't like, gross 80s horror movies and complained about most of them. He actually strangely liked Return of the Living Dead.
Yeah, I know.
It's funny because if you go back and read his review today, he refers to it as a ghoul movie, which goes to show you the age of the review, that he didn't call it a zombie movie. He kept saying ghoul.
Yeah. I mean, there's been some, like, horror movies, especially in the 80s, that Ebert's been very positive to. Like, he gave a really good review to Reanimator, and he also liked From Beyond and Dolls, which that really surprised me. But yeah, no, Return of the Living Dead, again, that is a classic.
Yeah, so I guess I'll pick the next movie to talk about. I think this is the last movie I had on my list. I said that I had one extreme horror movie on my list.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a more it's one that achieved some level of mainstream success, and that is Terrifier 2.
Yeah.
Now this is a movie that, like I said, doesn't, because you were saying earlier, right? We don't want to put it too bleak and depressing on here, or we don't want to put anything like Martyr. This is a very extreme, brutal movie. It has elements of fun if you're like sick enough, but but I put it on here just because it does fit the holiday. It does take place on Halloween. It's got, Halloween imagery. It's got that distinct sort of red and turquoise color palette that this movie series has. Yeah. And it's a movie I was actually looking forward to, because the thing is, I saw the first movie years ago, and on the one hand, the first movie, I would almost call it a guilty pleasure, because when I watched it, it kind of entranced me and it kind of scared me at times, but it was also kind of bad. It's hard to explain.
Yeah.
Because, it's a very cheap movie. It tries to make a style out of its cheapness, and it kind of succeeds, but it's very cheap. Acting's not great. It doesn't really have a story. It's kind of just some people getting killed by this killer on Halloween. There's not much of a plot to it, but it doesn't even really have a main character, because the main character kind of changes a couple times as different people get killed and cycled out. But I was intrigued by this villain they created. I thought he had a lot of charisma. David Howard, he's the way I would describe him is that Art the Clown as a character is that, well, he's a silent killer, but he has way more personality than those usually. And he's kind of like, if you took the Joker from like Batman, and I don't mean every version, I mean specifically like edgelord Joker, like Killing Joke, Death of the Family.
Oh yeah.
Like the kind of Joker who cripples people, tortures them, skins them alive, stitches their bodies together, wears his own severed face as a mask, etc. If you took that version of the Joker and made him like a silent slasher killer, that's kind of what Art the Clown is.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I will say with the first film, you definitely, it is definitely a very basic film, but I feel like it was one of those movies where Damien Leone was like clearly a fan of like 80s slashers and just wanted to make a pure like 80s themed slasher, and I do think he largely succeeded. And also I didn't think the acting in it was that bad, like, and I don't know, maybe I just am a sucker.
I didn't say it was that bad. I just said it wasn't that good.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. But I did enjoy the first Terrifier, and I also really like 2. And I'm sure you're probably gonna like defend this in some way. I don't think Terrifier 2 needed to be 2.5 hours long.
Well, yeah, and I do have a defense for this, which is that Terrifier 2 is a movie that got the fans kind of got this off the ground, right? And it came out, it was kind of, I think, a 5-year waiting period between the first one and it. I think Terrifier 2 at one point was going to be like in 2019 or 2020, but it kept getting put off. And when it finally came out, I was fine with it being too long, just because it had been such a wait to get to it. You want to get the most out of it.
No, yeah, I totally get that. Maybe that was part of it for me, because I didn't see the first Terrifier until 2 was coming out. So maybe if I had seen it back then, I would have felt that way. But aside from that, I still really like Terrifier 2. It's definitely a lot more brutal than the first film. It's got a really good lead character, in my opinion. I can't remember, is it Sienna or Sierra that's the main girl?
I believe Sienna. I think Sienna is the character's name.
Yeah, Sienna
and I will say this. Terrifier 2, unlike the first one, does have a story. I don't know if it's that great a story or if it totally makes sense, but it has one. It has more of one than the first movie. It tries to introduce a sort of enemy, a sort of nemesis for Art, which is, good. And I will say there are, I will say it is still kind of a guilty pleasure for me. Like, I kind of like these movies, but feel bad about it because they are just kind of like sadistic and shock value kind of stuff. But The second one tries to be a little less mean-spirited by having Art like lose at the end, which he didn't in previous appearances of his, really. So that's one thing, but yeah, this movie, and I will say another thing, which is I am kind of intrigued by the sort of story that these movies are revealing as they go, even though I don't trust Damien Leone to be a great writer necessarily. I am kind of curious where he's going. And another thing, you said before that the first one was trying to be like a pure 80s slasher, and it definitely has elements of that, right? It has the super heavy black shadows. It has kind of the gritty lo-fi look to it. But these movies are also kind of in the torture porn genre, which is more of a modern thing. They kind of because they kind of ride the line between both, because Art is a slasher killer and they do kind of follow slasher tropes, but the way he kills people often does kind of cross the line into like 2000s torture porn territory, which I don't necessarily have a problem with.
I can see that. Which, first of all, I never really liked the term torture porn, because to me it just sounded like a term that like really high-minded critics use to diminish most modern horror films. Like they were saying, oh, this is just nothing but pure torture porn, just utter trash, just garbage.
Guess my thing is it's the word that stuck is the thing for horror movies that have gratuitous and or lengthy torture scenes in them, so whatever, I'll use it.
No, I mean, like I said, it does make sense. I just was never a huge fan of the type of the word. But no, I remember when I first heard about Terrifier, I was kind of put off just because, I feel like clowns are kind of an overused thing in horror movies. I mean, obviously you have It, but then you also have like House of Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects, which I do love Devil's Rejects, but like, you have all these like killer clown movies, especially like nowadays, and I feel like it was kind of overdone. But Art the Clown, oh, sorry.
What makes him special is that even though he's called Art the Clown, he's not a killer clown. He's a killer mime, if you really think about it. Even though he's called Art the Clown, he's really more mime than he is clown, because he doesn't speak and he uses mime-like gestures and physical acting.
I would still say he's a clown, because he does do clowny things. Like he does ride a little tricycle. He's like got the clown horn, and he's very like playful in the way he does things. So I'd say he's like kind of a mixture of the two.
So yeah, I will say this movie, if you're of age, I would only recommend it obviously of age, and if you're in the mood to watch something just really violent and mean-spirited, which I sometimes am, sadly. But I will say too that one thing I will say, this is kind of a criticism I have of Terrifier 2, is that they build up this idea that the little brother in the movie, Sienna's younger brother, whose name escapes me, is going to dress up as Art the Clown for Halloween. And everybody's like, why are you doing this? This is disrespectful. This would be like dressing as John Wayne Gacy or Jeffrey Dahmer, for Halloween. But they build up that he's going to do this, right? And it goes nowhere. Why didn't he? I mean, what would Art's reaction be if he saw this kid dressed up as him for Halloween? How would he respond to that? Would he respect the kid? Would he be angry and try to kill him anyway? I don't know, but I'm like, if you're gonna set that up, why does it not go anywhere? That kind of bothered me. Like, why didn't they have a sort of Friday the 13th 4 moment where he sees this child dressed up as him? And I don't know. It's just, that's one kind of issue I had with it.
And I guess one other thing I will say about Terrifier is it is kind of funny that Terrifier 3 is actually doing better at the box office than Joker Filet Adieu. Like, I'm sure that probably stings Warner Brothers a lot, that like their multi-million-dollar epic is losing to a movie that probably only cost like maybe a couple $1,000,000. It was made independently. Like, they're probably really kicking themselves over that.
Yeah, I know David Howard Thornton has, I believe he said that he'd love to play the Joker, but I almost feel it would be in something, but I almost think it would be redundant because he's already kind of playing a Joker-esque character in his own series of movies.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I was actually going to ask, are you interested in seeing Terrifier 3 at all?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to watch that before the year is over.
Nice.
Either in theaters or maybe I'll rent it
Yeah,
when it
I
when it's when it's on streaming.
yeah, I've had a lot of people ask me, "Oh, are you going to see Terrifier 3?" And I do want to check it out, but I want to rewatch the first two and probably also review them just cuz I feel like if I'm going to talk about the third one, I might as well talk about the first two. But no, I do really enjoy Terrifier 2. And I also find it funny. One more thing I'll say is it was funny reading all the reports about people like fainting and passing out because of how like quote unquote graphic it was. And don't get me wrong, the movie is very graphic and gruesome, but I kind of was like, like it's nothing I hadn't really seen before in other movies.
Well, I think that was just marketing, but you have to realize this film came after a long drought 2010s where there weren't a lot of extreme gore movies where horror was focused more on other things, right?
Yeah.
Like I want to say the last like really mainstream like super gory horror movie I want to say was that was maybe the 2013 Evil Dead remake. I guess you got a I guess you got a few I guess you got maybe I guess Saw you had a sequel or two in there. But my point is there had been a period of time where the focus was more on either paranormal haunting stuff or like elevated horror for a while, for about a decade. And so when this movie came out, I think a lot of younger people just went into it not prepared for this level of gore because it had not been in a horror movie for a while.
No,
at least not one in theaters.
That makes sense. But yeah, I guess we're winding down a little bit. I've got two more on here that we might just, I don't know, we'll go into a bit more depth on it. But my next pick is one of my personal favorites. It's definitely kind of a left turn from Terrifier 2, and that's the Monster Squad. The way I've always described this movie to people is that it's like, imagine if it's the Goonies versus the Universal Monsters, but like, well, in the most legally distinct way possible, because this movie wasn't actually produced by Universal, and the filmmakers had to go out of their way to make sure that the monsters were recognizable enough, but not enough to where Universal would come knocking on their door with a cease and desist order.
Yeah, I will say this. I'm not an '80s kid, so I did not grow up. I was born in the '90s. I didn't grow up with Monster Squad, but and I've only seen snippets of it. I saw Monster House as a kid, which was, I guess, kind of like my generation's equivalent of something like this.
Yeah.
And that movie, I'll give an honorable mention to that movie because I don't love it, but you know, it is Halloweeny.
Yeah.
But yeah, Monster Squad. I know it's got I do know this is one of those like 80 like weirdly gritty 80s kids movies, you know.
Yeah.
that's kind of inappropriate, you know, like what we were saying about Beetlejuice, that's kind of inappropriate but you can kind of still watch as a kid.
Because like in the Monster Squad, you've got a little girl calling boys chicken shit, and you've got one of my favorite little moments is Dracula like has a hold of the little girl and he's like, "Give me the amulet, you bitch." Really? And like, when else in a horror movie are you gonna see?
I know also the God Any Virgins scene. I know that's in there.
Yeah, or like when the one kid is like trying to explain to his sister, like asking her if she's ever had sex, and he is like dancing around and he's like, "Have you ever, you know, been dorked?" But no, Monster Squad, I mean, I'll admit I was also a 90s kid. I didn't really grow up with this movie. I think the first time I saw it might have been like in the mid to late 2000s. I'll fully admit I watched it because James Rolfe, aka the Angry Video Game Nerd, mentioned this on Monster Madness, and I thought it looked really cool, and I absolutely love it. I think I love the monsters in it. The kids are a lot of fun, and it does have some pretty dark moments in it too. Like there's like this one neighbor who they always call the scary German guy, and there's a moment where you see like tattoos on his arm, and he mentions like that he's seen real monsters, and it's like they're implying that he's a Holocaust survivor, which is really unexpected. But that, and of course you got the monsters themselves. Like I know it's kind of sacrilegious to say this, but I think the Gill Man in Monster Squad looks better than the creature from the Black Lagoon. Like, it is essentially kind of Creature from the Black Lagoon by way of Predator, but I don't know. I always just like the look of the Gill Man a little bit more. Just he's a lot more vicious looking and a lot meaner and more threatening.
And I will say this is part of that sort of genre of movies that Stranger Things was trying to throw back to that made it successful in the first place, you know?
Yeah,
It's part of that genre, you know, movies like The Goonies, Poltergeist, The Gate. I don't know if you've ever seen The Gate. I guess I'll just stick that as another honorable mention. Why not? The Gate.
Yeah, I've been meaning to get to that one.
Those sorts of movies.
Yeah, it's definitely like kind of a gateway horror movie, so to speak. Like it's a movie that is certainly scary, but it's one that's like a little bit safer for your kids versus something like any of the Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street movies or anything like that.
And the fact that it uses like old kind of played out monsters who had already sort of become kitsch by that point sort of helps it out not being too scary. I would assume. Yeah, because characters like Jason and Freddy, I mean, they would kind of be turned into kitsch too, but not until a little later.
Yeah, and I also love how they like play with the mythology of some of these monsters, like the Wolfman. I mean, of course, you got the Wolfman's got Nard scene, but there's also like the scene where they try to blow him up, and they explain that like you can't really kill a werewolf like that because traditionally the only way to kill a werewolf is with something made of silver. So they show like him blowing up, but then later they show him like reforming, kind of like the Iron Giant. And I've always thought that was like a really clever touch. And I also love how the kids bond with like the Frankenstein monster, and like there's a scene where like he punches out Dracula going bogus, and I don't know, it's just I could go on for hours about how much I love the Monster Squad, and it's another one of those like cult movies that definitely became a cult film because like when it came out, it did not do very well at all. Like it bombed in theaters. It got pretty harsh reviews, and it wasn't really until like TV and eventually VHS that it got any kind of following. And like I think the only reason why it got a DVD release is because the fans like petitioned for it to get a DVD release, and it kind of just grew over time. And it's one of those movies that I'm sure like the people making it wanted it to be a hit, but they're just thankful that it found any kind of following. And
so I'm curious to know what your final movie is.
So the last one that I have here to talk about is Night of the Demons, which this might actually be the ultimate Halloween movie. I mean, for one, it's actually set on Halloween, but also it's got that kind of scary but also like playful kind of vibe to it where it's definitely gory.
We talked about Evil Dead and House before and the kind of tone those movies have. I would put Night of the Demons in the same kind of category as those.
Yeah, no, I can see that where it's like very gory and gruesome, but it's also like kind of funny at the same time. Like it's definitely not meant to be taken seriously. Like it's more of a fun, kitschy kind of horror, but not the obnoxious kind that like kind of pokes and winks at you all the time.
You talking about like The Babysitter?
I've never seen Babysitter.
Well, that's a movie that's kind of not on my list, but it's just what pops into my head when you talk about a horror movie that feels like it's like winking to the audience too much.
Yeah.
As a horror comedy.
Yeah, but no, I do love Night of the Demons. Like it is a very simple story, but the characters make it work so well. Like they're all memorable in their own way, whether it's like the main girl who's just like Alice, or the main like punk chick who like invites everybody to this like old mortuary to celebrate Halloween. And then you got Linnea Quigley doing what Linnea Quigley always does, which is go get topless. It's got some pretty gruesome kills. It's got some great lines of dialogue, like the one fat dude who goes, "Eat a bowl of fuck," and it's just it's a really fun like little movie. And also I gotta mention the opening credits for Night of the Demons kind of helps set the tone of the movie because it's like in this lo-fi animated style where it's got like a creepy house and like bats flying around and like all this kind of spooky imagery. Like it kind of helps set the tone for the rest of the movie.
I will say one thing that kind of they talk in the movie, the girls talk about how they're going to scare the boys in this movie early on. Like they're going to bring them out to this location and they're going to scare them, right?
Yeah.
And that's another setup where I'm like, well, that didn't really go anywhere. Like it almost makes you think, oh, is the horror stuff going to turn out to be some sort of prank? But no, it's all just real. There's never like a pranking, like a fake out prank thing that they do to them. So that's kind of one thing I feel they just sort of foreshadowed but then dropped in the movie, kind of like what I was saying about the kid dressing up like Art in Terrifier 2, where they set that up and it doesn't go anywhere. But Night of the Demons is, for what it is. I don't like it as much as I like obviously the Evil Dead movies or some other films in that same kind of category like House, but it's still pretty watchable.
Yeah. And kind of going back to your point, I feel like with the whole like scaring the boys thing, I feel like they tried to do that simply by having them like go to this haunted mausoleum or mortuary or whatever.
Yeah, they did. I just thought there was going to be more to that.
Yeah, and
it seemed like they were setting up for something that was going to pay off later, and it didn't as much.
Yeah, and for the record, I haven't seen either of the sequels, but I did see the remake from 2009, I want to say, and I remember it being okay. I mean, if nothing else, you got a older, more strung out Edward Furlong killing demons with a rusted pipe. Like, that's at least worth something. So
yeah, no. Oh, sorry. Go on.
No. What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, it only just now occurred to me that neither of us decided to talk about any of the Evil Dead movies. I feel like those are super obvious, but I guess maybe I didn't put one on my list because I assumed you'd talk about one of them. But Evil Dead movies, especially Evil Dead 2, because that's more the one that balances the comedy and kind of the grisly stuff.
Yeah,
it has like the finest balance of them. That's obviously a Halloween classic. But everybody already knows that. Yeah,
and I've gone on and on about how much I love the Evil Dead movies. And I've reviewed all 3 movies, both on my site and on YouTube. I did a whole stream talk about the Evil Dead franchise. Like I'm pretty sure most everybody who's familiar with me knows how much I love the Evil Dead. But yeah, no, I agree. I do think the Evil Dead movies, especially 2, would kind of fit into that sort of like Halloween-y vibe.
Yeah. Well, I would say Army of Darkness, maybe just because of the whole medieval fantasy aesthetic, doesn't as much as the first 2 do. But definitely the first 2. I mean, you get to the 2013 movie, that's more like I said, like brutal, ultra violent, not as much humor, but I still, it's. I don't think there's been an outright bad Evil Dead movie yet. Of the 5 that have been released, I don't think any of them are outright bad movies.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Even though I didn't like love the 2013 remake, but I at least appreciated that it felt like the people who made it actually cared about the series rather than just, oh, we have the rights to the Evil Dead, let's just shit out this remake and make a few bucks off of it. And Rise, like, I was surprised at how much I liked Rise, because when I saw the trailer, I was like, this doesn't really feel like an Evil Dead movie. And then I saw it and I'm like, oh, yeah, this is definitely an Evil Dead movie. But I guess,
I guess it didn't have quite as like attention grabbing a protagonist maybe as the previous ones did, but I still think it was okay. It wasn't outright bad. It had some pretty gruesome gore moments in it too. This was around the same time as Terrifier 2, around the same time gore was making a comeback.
Yeah.
And Saw X came shortly later because it was the right opportunity for it.
Exactly.
But I think like it had the cheese grater thing, it had the glass swallowing scene, those are wince-inducing. And it had but I will say, I mean, Ash himself, to be fair, was not that magnetic of a protagonist yet in the first movie. He wasn't quite the character that we know him as by this point.
Yeah, he didn't really come into his own until the sequel, but that was kind of by design. Like, he was supposed to be like the reluctant hero in the first movie, and then in the second one he kind of mans up and like takes charge, and then in Army of Darkness he's like, you know, this very suave, like kind of bigger than life figure who like kind of swaggers about, and he's like, yeah, what's up?
Yeah, so I've over the course of this list, I've thrown out a couple honorable mentions that I didn't want to devote a whole slot to talking about. Do you have any of those before we leave?
I guess nothing. Oh no, wait, I did have a few honorable mentions I wanted to bring up. Reanimator, I would definitely put up there because that one's another one that it's very gruesome and it is kind of depressing in some way, but it's also like definitely got its tongue planted firmly in its cheek. And my other honorable mention would be Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Definitely a very different beast from the first film, which is funny considering it's from the same director. But that one is just so kind of like brain dead a little bit. It's so cartoonishly gruesome and gory that it's kind of hard to take it seriously, and you're not meant to take it seriously. And it's also just really goofy with like Chop Top saying like, "Lick my plate, you dog dick," and Leatherface like doing his like weird dance throughout the movie.
Yeah, I've seen memes about how Rob's on that line of dialogue, you know, "Lick my plate, you dog dick," and he decided, whoa, that's beautiful. I'm gonna make every single line of dialogue in every movie that I sound exactly like that.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, so those are just a couple movies that both of us recommend, you know, as a good time to watch for the Halloween season, really get you in the spooky mood. What were we going to say?
I was going to say something about TCM2 real quick,
Sure.
which is that this movie just goes to show Texas Chainsaw Massacre does not work as a franchise at all, because no two movies in the franchise, except maybe Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2003 and The Beginning.
Yeah.
No two movies in this franchise feel like they hook up or exist in the same universe. And that even includes the first two.
Yeah.
But Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, you know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is good enough that I can forgive it. But even, you know, between the first and second film, it's like the tone is different. Leatherface looks totally different. The grandpa looks totally different.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that really connects the first two is the fact that they both have Jim Saito as the old man. Aside from that, like, they are very different beasts, which, again, is funny considering that they're both directed by Tobe Hooper.
Yeah, another quick honorable mention, I want to reference a movie that I feel could have been like a great new gateway horror for this generation, but kind of fumbled it, is I want to bring up Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, the 2019 movie.
Okay.
This is a film that could have been a new Halloween classic because it's set on Halloween. It's got a lot of cool visuals that, you know, a variety of monsters, and they took the monsters from the illustrations and they recreated them beautifully in live action. They look just perfect. And but the movie just isn't quite good because they decided, instead of making it an anthology, which would have been the obvious thing to do, they decided to connect all the stories to where like the overarching villain is this witch ghost who like writes stuff down, and what she writes down happens in real life. So she just has, I guess, unlimited power. I don't know. It's kind of ambiguous. So all these other monsters are just instead of existing on their own, they're all just kind of conjured up by her, which is lame. And it's got this weird political. You talked about. It's got this weird political thing with Richard Nixon where they keep hammering in this anti-Nixon message throughout the movie in a really heavy-handed way because it's set around the time of his election. And I thought that was kind of odd. And it just, I don't know. It's like there's this part where like there's some monster chasing this guy down, and it just shows this TV showing Richard Nixon's election is going on at the same time. Like, you're supposed to draw a parallel between these things. And I'm like, okay, why is this commentary in this movie? But I don't know. It's so it fumbled the bag, and it pisses me off because, like I said, there are scenes with these monsters who show up from the books, and they really do make them look like the books, and they get some cool scenes, but it doesn't work as a movie as a whole. And I don't know if I have any other honorations to go over besides those.
All right. Well, I guess on that note, we can probably just wrap it up here. So first of all, Mimi, thank you so much for coming on to my little stream tonight. It was great to have you. And for
you're welcome.
And for the audience who are watching, where can they find you?
You can find me on my YouTube channel, Mizz Mimi. My most recently uploaded video was a collaboration with Strigoi that was parodying the Shadow Generations animations that Sega's been putting out. And I thought, oh, I got to rush this out quick before somebody else does this joke and somebody else beat me to it. Oh, well. But I did it in video form first, I think.
Yeah. I actually did watch the video, and I thought it was kind of funny. And I thought you did a good job as Maria, and I thought Sergoi also made for a really good Shadow.
Yeah, I just immediately, I thought of him quick, because I was like, oh, he sounds enough like Shadow's current voice actor. I got to get him to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can check that out, please. Get it up to 1 million views, FilmNerd audience. All of you come over here and rewatch it as much as you can.
Yeah.
I'd really appreciate it.
Of course. And of course you can find you guys should know where to find me. I'm on social media. I've got the website film-nerd.com. My most recent review was for Smile 2, which honestly I actually I actually like that one better than the first one. But that's a whole other thing we could get into. Of course, I got the Patreon, which you can support if you want to. Normally, I would promote my Discord, but I decided to end that just because it felt like there was the right thing to do. In terms of future projects, I'm working on my next Full Moon Fridays video, which special shout out to Mimi. She did a really good job doing the voiceover for a promo that I made for the series that I really hope set the tone for the series.
Thanks a million.
Okay. All right. I guess on that note, I'll probably just end it here. Mimi, once again, thank you so much for coming on. Do you have any final words to say before we head out?
You're welcome. I don't know if I have anything interesting to say, just that I hope you all have a great Halloween. I hope you all go out, get yourself some good candies, get yourself some Kit Kat bars, get yourself some Sour Punch straws, and then give them all to me.
Yeah,
bye.
Give her all the cavities. So yeah, that's gonna do it for tonight. Thank you guys as always for watching. Look forward to more videos and more views coming out soon. And until then, I will see you in the next one. Take care.
Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween, silver shamrock. Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween, silver shamrock.
It's almost time, kids. The clock is ticking. Be in front of your TV sets for the Horathon. And remember the big giveaway at 9. Don't miss it. And don't forget to wear your masks. The clock is ticking. It's almost time.
Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween, silver shamrock. Happy, happy Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. Happy, happy Halloween, silver shamrock. Thank you.